Hey, I'm Mike with the Florida Public Archaeology Network, and this is another one of our Field Trip Friday videos. Today, we're going on a field trip to Ponce de Leon State Park, which is located in Holmes County in Northwest Florida. Ponce de Leon Springs has over 400 acres of recreational opportunities here. So there's some hiking trails. Unfortunately, today there was some flooding. We've had a lot of rain over the last week, so the hiking trails are pretty flooded. And the main thing here, though, is of course the spring. The spring here is a second magnitude spring that produces over 14 million gallons of water per day. Normally, it is a crystal clear spring, but of course, because of the flooding today, there's been a lot of sediment that's come in because of the different river systems and all the sediments that brings in. So it doesn't look great today, but it still is a nice, cool 68 degrees year round. I'm actually walking down the boardwalk headed to the Ponce de Leon Spring right now. However, this area has been used for a long time. We know from the archaeology here that pre-colonial native people have been using this spring probably as a place to get fresh water and maybe even recreationally as well for thousands of years. But it wasn't until the 1920s that a local family built a bathhouse here to try to cater to tourists to use this area. You see, before people came to Florida for its beaches, they came to places like this for its springs. At first, in the late to middle 19th century, people were using springs for medical reasons, for health reasons. They thought there were good health properties. If you were sick, you could come down, get that nice warm air, and enjoy the springs to kind of, I guess, get better. But over time, people really started to use these, especially by the 20th century, for recreational opportunities. If you do come to Ponce de Leon Springs State Park, there's lots of interpretation. So there's lots of signage that tells you all about this area and the geology of the spring system, like this sign right here. So as you can see, this sign protecting Florida Spring, it says, beneath our feet, below Florida's surface soils is a thick layer of limestone. Over many centuries, acidic rainwater has slowly dissolved cracks and tunnels into the porous limestone, forming Swiss cheese-like appearance. So this is why this spring is here. It's that limestone that's opened up and it stores that water. The water that we have here is all part of Florida's aquifer, and an aquifer is basically just an underground supply of water. And in this area, it's all stored within that limestone karst. So this is where most of our drinking water comes from. And that's why it's such an important resource that we have in the state. As you can see over here, you can see how many different springs that we have. He says there are over 600 springs throughout the entire state of Florida. We have a couple hundred just in Holmes and Washington counties alone. So there's lots of springs out there. There's other areas that you can go if you're interested in going to springs locally, like Morrison Springs or Vortex Springs. So now we're going to walk on down to the spring, and like I said, it's not crystal clear today because of all the runoff that we've had with the rains over the last several weeks. But one thing that springs do face is threatened by human activity. So this comes in the form of pollution, so from gasoline and oil that comes off of cars. All of that will run off to the streets and down into the drains and eventually wind up into fresh bodies of water like our spring. The other thing that can really pollute these springs is things like septic tanks. Septic tanks will sometimes leak and then cause all sorts of problems within our springs. So this is Ponce de Leon Spring. Like I said, it's a second magnitude spring producing over 14 million gallons of water per day. If you look at it, it's not clear at all. But what's really cool is this wall right here. So when the family built the bathhouse here in the 1920s, they originally constructed a wooden wall to create a swimming hole for the vent of the spring. Now that wooden wall's not here anymore, but instead they have this really cool stone wall. And if you look really closely at it, you'll notice that it's made out of that limestone. And again, limestone, that rock that's naturally formed over time, over millions and millions of years, is really commonly found in this area of Northwest Florida, especially in Jackson County. This is normally a very popular swimming spot to the locals. They get a lot of tourists too that come from all over the country. But obviously, as you can see, there's not that many people today that are actually here. I was going to even be one of the people swimming in this. I even brought my rash guard, but I won't be needing that today. But it is still the summer in Northwest Florida, so it's very hot. So I'm at least going to dip my feet in this 68-degree water. Yeah, definitely 68 degrees. So like I said, the trails today are flooded because of that rain that we've had for the last couple weeks. If you try to go up the entrance of the trail, there's just no way you can get in because it's so deep. But we know where the trail comes out of because it does a big loop. So it looks like on the exit to the trail is actually not too bad. So I'm going to hike down a little bit and see if we can find any evidence of the past use of this place for the turpentine industry. So this is about how far the trail actually gets us today, and as you can see, the rest of it is just completely flooded out. So we're not going to actually be able to see any of what we were looking for, which was evidence of that turpentine industry. The turpentine industry was really big in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and basically they were tapping pine trees for sap and then using that to make all sorts of different types of naval stores, so things like turpentine, for example. We actually find evidence, I know there are evidence of that in this park where we can see where the trees that they actually would have tapped for that sap and some of the containers that they would have captured that in. But we're not going to be able to get that far upland to actually see the pine trees. But on a normal day, when the trails aren't flooded, this is a really beautiful hike that will take you through a lot of different types of environments that we have here in Northwest Florida. Big elephant in the room is that name that this place gets, Ponce de Leon. Of course, Ponce de Leon was a Spanish conquistador. He's credited with discovering, at least being the first Spanish person to, find Florida. He's the one that actually gave Florida its name, La Florida, that came from Ponce de Leon on his expedition. But the truth is, Ponce de Leon never came up this far to Florida, and he was not looking for the Fountain of Youth. He was trying to establish a Spanish presence and foothold in what's now Florida, but he never came up this far. The reason why this place is called Ponce de Leon Springs is related to that idea of the Fountain of Youth, so the spring being here, but really they did it for boasting tourism to this area. They thought by connecting it to a very well-known person from Florida's history that it would bring more people to this area, and I guess in some ways it kind of worked. But the name stuck, but Ponce de Leon never came up this far. We do know some Spanish explorers came up to this region, possibly as early as 1526, and again in the 1530s with Hernando de Soto, but never Ponce.